My boss literally threw my promotion party for someone else, and what happened next destroyed his entire career in ways he never saw coming. This isn't just about workplace politics, this is about how one dinner conversation exposed a web of lies that brought down a multimillion-dollar company. I need to tell you this story because what happened that night still gives me chills, and honestly, it changed how I see power dynamics forever. My name is Sarah, and 3 years ago I was the senior marketing analyst at Meridian Corp, a tech consulting firm in downtown Seattle. I'd been there for 5 years, working my way up from an entry-level position, putting in 60-hour weeks, and consistently delivering results that kept our biggest clients happy. The thing about corporate America is that it's built on these invisible hierarchies that everyone pretends don't exist. You know what I mean, right? There's the official org chart, and then there's the real power structure, the one where your actual value gets measured by who likes you at the company Christmas party, not by the revenue you generate. My boss was David Brown, a smooth-talking MBA who'd joined the company 2 years after me but somehow leapfrogged into management. David had this way of making you feel like you were part of something bigger, like you were on the same team, fighting the same battles. He'd lean back in his chair during one-on-ones and say things like, "Sarah, you're the backbone of this department. I don't know what I'd do without you." For months, David had been hinting about a promotion. Not just any promotion, but the director of strategic marketing position that had opened up when Janet left for Google. It was a $50,000 raise, equity options, and most importantly, it was recognition for all the late nights I'd spent fixing other people's disasters. The promotion committee meets next month, David told me during our weekly check-in. I'm going to make sure your name is at the top of the list. You've earned this, Sarah. Really? I believed him. God, I actually believed him. The weeks leading up to the promotion committee meeting were brutal. I was working on 3 major client presentations simultaneously, covering for a colleague who'd taken medical leave, and still managing to exceed my quarterly targets. I remember thinking that this was it, this was my moment to break through that invisible ceiling that had been hovering over my head for years. Then came the company-wide email that changed everything. Please join us in congratulating Marcus Rodriguez on his promotion to Director of Strategic Marketing. Marcus brings fresh perspective and innovative thinking to our leadership team. We'll be celebrating at Cascadia Restaurant this Friday at 7 p.m. I stared at that email for probably 10 minutes, reading it over and over again, waiting for it to make sense. Marcus Rodriguez. A guy who'd been hired 6 months ago from a failed startup. A guy who'd never managed a team, never closed a major deal, never even finished a project without someone else cleaning up his mistakes. But here's the thing that really got me. Marcus was David's old college roommate from Stanford. They'd been friends since they were 20 years old, and apparently, that friendship was worth more than 5 years of my dedication and results. The rational part of my brain told me to skip the celebration dinner. Stay home, update my resume, start looking for a new job. But something deeper, something that had been building up for years, told me to go. I needed to see this play out. I needed to understand exactly what I'd been fighting against all this time. Cascadia Restaurant is one of those places where tech executives go to feel important. Floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist decor, and entrees that cost more than most people spend on groceries in a week. I arrived exactly at 7 p.m., wearing my best professional outfit, carrying myself like I belonged there. The private dining room was buzzing with conversation when I walked in. David was holding court at the head of the table, gesticulating wildly as he told some story about a client meeting. Marcus was sitting to his right, looking uncomfortable but trying to play the part of the celebrated executive. "Sarah," David called out when he saw me. "I'm so glad you made it. Come, sit down. We were just talking about the Morrison account." I took a seat about halfway down the table, between 2 colleagues who gave me sympathetic looks. Everyone knew what had happened. Everyone knew this should have been my celebration. But corporate etiquette demanded that we all pretend everything was normal, that merit had somehow won the day. The first hour was exactly what you'd expect. Speeches about Marcus's innovative approach and fresh perspective. Toasts to the future of the department. Polite applause from people who were mentally calculating how this change would affect their own career trajectories. I sat there, smiling and nodding, playing the part of the gracious colleague. But inside, I was making mental notes. I was watching how power really worked in this room. I was seeing the casual way that David dismissed the contributions of the people who actually did the work, while elevating someone whose biggest qualification was showing up to the right fraternity parties 15 years ago. Then came the moment that changed everything. David stood up for another toast, his face flushed from the wine and the attention. "You know," he said, swaying slightly, "I have to tell you all something. This promotion, it wasn't even close. Marcus was always the obvious choice. Sometimes you have to look beyond the numbers and see the bigger picture." He gestured toward Marcus, who looked like he wanted to disappear under the table. "Marcus has that it factor, you know? That leadership quality that you can't teach. It's not about who's been here longest or who's worked the most hours. It's about who can take us to the next level." The room went quiet. I could feel people glancing at me, waiting to see how I'd react. David, oblivious to the tension, kept going. "I mean, let's be honest, some people are just order takers. They're great at executing, but they'll never be strategic thinkers. They'll never see the forest for the trees. That's okay. We need those people too. But leadership? That's something you're born with." That's when I realized that David wasn't just talking about the promotion. He was talking about me. He was explaining to a room full of my colleagues why I would never be leadership material, why I would always be support staff, why 5 years of excellence didn't matter because I lacked some indefinable quality that only people like Marcus possessed. The thing is, I could have gotten angry. I could have made a scene, called him out right there in front of everyone. But anger would have proved his point. It would have shown that I was emotional, unprofessional, not ready for leadership. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I smiled. "That's such an interesting perspective, David," I said, my voice calm and measured. "I'm curious, though. When you say leadership is something you're born with, are you talking about the kind of leadership that leads to results, or the kind that leads to relationships?" David blinked, clearly not expecting a question. "Well, both, obviously. But relationships are crucial in business. You can't just be a numbers person." "Absolutely," I agreed. "Relationships are everything. Take the Morrison account, for example. Marcus, I know you've been working closely with them since you joined. How has that relationship been developing?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Well, I've been getting up to speed on their needs." "Of course," I said, still smiling. "Getting up to speed is so important. David, you mentioned that Marcus has been leading the strategic direction on Morrison. I'm curious about something, though. Last week, when Morrison threatened to pull their contract because of the delayed deliverables, who handled that crisis?" The room got even quieter. David's face was starting to lose some of its flush. "Well, that was a team effort." "You're absolutely right," I said. "It was a team effort. I remember because I was the one who got the call at 11 p.m. on a Friday night. I was the one who spent the weekend rebuilding their entire project timeline. I was the one who presented the recovery plan to their board on Monday morning." I turned to Marcus, keeping my voice friendly and conversational. "Marcus, I'm sure you were involved in that process too. What was your role in the Morrison recovery?" Marcus looked like he was going to be sick. I was traveling that week." "Right, you were at that conference in Austin. The one about innovative leadership strategies. That must have been valuable." I could see David trying to figure out how to regain control of the conversation, but I wasn't done yet. "You know what's funny?" I continued. "I've been thinking about what you said about strategic thinking versus execution. It's such a great point. Because someone who's truly strategic would probably know that Morrison represents 32% of our department's revenue. They'd know that we're up for renewal in 6 weeks, and that they've been dissatisfied with our communication processes for months. I paused, letting that sink in. A strategic thinker would also know that Morrison isn't our only at-risk client. Hoffman Industries has been asking for a new account manager because they feel like their current contact doesn't understand their business model. And Pacific Systems, well, they've been pretty direct about their concerns regarding project oversight. The room was dead silent now. Everyone was staring at me, including David, who looked like he was starting to realize that something was very wrong. "Sarah," David said, his voice tight, "I think we're getting a little off topic here." "Are we?" I asked. Because I thought we were talking about leadership. About strategic thinking. About who has the bigger picture in mind. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. You know what's interesting about strategic thinking? It's about seeing patterns. It's about understanding cause and effect. It's about being prepared for different scenarios. I opened my email app and turned the screen toward the table. For instance, a strategic thinker might have anticipated that promoting someone without the necessary experience could create some complications. David's face went white. "What are you talking about?" "Well, let's see. There's the email from Morrison's CEO asking specifically for me to be assigned as their primary contact going forward. There's the message from Pacific Systems requesting that I lead their Q4 strategy session. And here's my personal favorite, the job offer from Hoffman Industries." I set the phone down on the table, screen still glowing. They want me to head up their new marketing division. The salary is, well, it's more than what the director position pays here. But the interesting part isn't the money. It's that they've been planning to pull their contract with us and bring their marketing in-house. They've been waiting for the right person to lead that transition. You could have heard a pin drop. David was staring at me like I'd just pulled a rabbit out of a hat. Marcus looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and never come out. "The thing is," I continued, "I've been thinking about what you said about order takers versus strategic thinkers. And you're right. There are people who just execute, and there are people who see the bigger picture. But I think you might have gotten confused about which category I fall into." I stood up, smoothing down my skirt. "See, while you were focused on managing up and building relationships with the people above you, I was building relationships with the people who actually pay our bills. While you were thinking about org charts and promotion committees, I was thinking about client retention and revenue growth." I picked up my phone and put it back in my purse. A strategic thinker would have recognized that promoting someone who doesn't have the trust of our 3 largest clients might create some challenges. But then again, strategic thinking has never really been about the numbers, has it? David finally found his voice. "Sarah, I think you're overreacting here. This is supposed to be a celebration." "You're absolutely right," I said, putting on my coat. "This is a celebration. Marcus, congratulations on your promotion. I'm sure you'll do great things with those 3 accounts." I headed toward the door, then paused and turned back. "Oh, and David? When Morrison calls tomorrow asking about their timeline for next quarter, you might want to make sure Marcus is available to take that call. Because I won't be." I walked out of that restaurant with my head held high, leaving behind a room full of people who were just starting to understand what had really happened. The next morning, I called in sick. Not because I was actually sick, but because I needed a day to think. I needed to process what I'd done and figure out what came next. My phone started ringing around 10 a.m. David, of course. "Sarah, we need to talk. Can you come in today?" "I'm not feeling well, David. I think I need to take a few days." "This is about last night, isn't it?" "Look, I think there were some misunderstandings." "Were there?" Because I thought I understood everything pretty clearly. There was a long pause. "Sarah, you're a valuable member of this team. Let's not do anything hasty." "Hasty?" "David, I've been patient for 5 years. I don't think taking a few sick days qualifies as hasty." I hung up and turned off my phone. I needed space to think, and more importantly, I needed to see how this would play out without my intervention. By Wednesday, the messages on my voicemail were getting increasingly desperate. Not just from David, but from Marcus, from HR, even from the VP of Operations. Apparently, Morrison had indeed called about their timeline, and when Marcus couldn't answer their questions, they'd requested an immediate meeting with senior leadership. The meeting had not gone well. I finally went back to work on Thursday, walking into the office like nothing had happened. David was waiting for me at my desk, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "Sarah, thank God. We need to talk. Conference room, now." I followed him into the conference room, where Marcus was already waiting, looking miserable. "Okay," David said, closing the door. "We have a situation. Morrison is threatening to pull their contract. Pacific Systems is asking questions. And Hoffman, well, they've officially terminated their agreement with us." I sat down, placing my hands on the table. "That's unfortunate. How can I help?" David stared at me. "How can you help? Sarah, you know exactly what's happening here. You orchestrated this." "I orchestrated what, exactly?" "I didn't make Marcus unable to answer basic questions about our clients' needs. I didn't create the communication problems that Morrison has been complaining about for months. I didn't make Hoffman Industries decide to bring their marketing in-house." "But you knew," Marcus said, speaking for the first time. "You knew they were planning to leave, and you didn't tell us." I looked at him with what I hoped was genuine curiosity. "Marcus, in your strategic leadership role, don't you think it's important to maintain regular communication with our largest clients? Don't you think it's part of your job to know when they're dissatisfied?" "This isn't about client communication," David said. "This is about you sabotaging Marcus's transition." "Sabotaging?" "David, I've been doing my job exactly the same way I've been doing it for 5 years. The only thing that's changed is that now I'm not covering for other people's mistakes." That's when it hit him. For 5 years, I'd been quietly fixing problems, smoothing over client relationships, and making sure that deliverables got completed on time. I'd been the safety net that allowed people like David to look competent while not actually understanding the business. "Sarah," David said, his voice carefully controlled, "what do you want?" "I want to do my job," I said simply. "I want to work with clients who value my expertise. I want to be part of a team that makes decisions based on merit and results. If this is about the promotion..." "David, this isn't about the promotion. This is about respect. This is about recognizing that some people contribute more than others, and that contribution should matter." I stood up. "Marcus, I wish you the best with your new role. I'm sure you'll figure it out. David, if you need me, I'll be at my desk, doing my job." I left them in the conference room and went back to my desk. An hour later, I got a call from HR asking me to come in for a meeting. The HR meeting was everything you'd expect. Accusations of unprofessional behavior, suggestions that I was creating a hostile work environment, threats about my future with the company. I sat there and listened, nodding at appropriate intervals, and then I said something that clearly wasn't what they expected. "You know what? You're right. I think it's time for me to move on." I submitted my resignation that afternoon, effective in 2 weeks. But the real drama was just beginning. The next week, Morrison pulled their contract. Not just the current project, but their entire relationship with the company. They sent a formal letter explaining that they'd lost confidence in our ability to manage their account effectively. Pacific Systems followed 2 days later. By the end of the month, Meridian Corp had lost 60% of their revenue. David was forced to lay off half the marketing department. Marcus lasted exactly 6 weeks in his new role before being quietly transferred to a junior position in business development. The irony wasn't lost on me. David had been so focused on promoting someone who looked like leadership material that he'd forgotten to consider whether that person could actually lead. But here's the part that still amazes me. 3 months after I left, I got a call from the CEO of Meridian Corporation. The company was hemorrhaging clients, And they wanted to know if I'd consider coming back as director of client relations. Not marketing, not strategy, but client relations. Because apparently, they'd finally figured out that client relationships were the foundation of everything else. I told them I'd think about it. Actually, I laughed. I laughed for about 10 minutes straight. Because by that point, I was already 3 months into my new job as VP of Marketing at Hoffman Industries. The job they'd offered me that night at Cascadia Restaurant. The job that came with a 40% salary increase, equity options, and most importantly, a boss who understood that results matter more than relationships. The funny thing is, I never intended for any of this to happen. I didn't walk into that restaurant planning to destroy David's career or bring down Marcus's promotion. I just got tired of pretending that merit didn't matter. But sometimes, when you stop propping up a system that's fundamentally broken, it collapses under its own weight. David reached out to me about 6 months later. He'd been let go from Meridian Corp and was struggling to find a new position. Apparently, word had gotten around in the Seattle tech scene about what had happened. He wanted to apologize, to explain his side of the story. I met him for coffee, mostly out of curiosity. He looked tired, older than his years, and genuinely remorseful. "Sarah, I want you to know that I never intended for things to go the way they did. I thought I was doing what was best for the company." "What did you think was best, David?" He stirred his coffee for a long time before answering. "I thought Marcus would grow into the role. I thought his connections, his background, would help us land bigger clients." "And what about my connections? What about my background? You were always so good at your job. I guess I thought you'd always be there, doing what you did, keeping everything running smoothly." That's when I realized that David had never seen me as a person with ambitions and goals. He'd seen me as a resource to be managed, a tool to be used. He'd been so focused on the org chart that he'd forgotten that the people below him were human beings with their own career aspirations. "David, can I ask you something? In all the time we worked together, did you ever ask me what I wanted to do with my career?" He thought about it for a long moment. No. I guess I assumed you were happy with your role." "I was happy with my work. I was never happy with my role." We talked for another hour, and by the end of it, I actually felt sorry for him. Not because he'd lost his job, but because he'd never understood that leadership isn't about managing people like chess pieces. It's about helping people become the best versions of themselves. The last thing he said to me was, "I wish I'd promoted you instead of Marcus. Things would have been different." I thought about that for a long time after he left. Would things have been different? Maybe. But probably not in the way he thought. Because the real problem wasn't that Marcus got promoted and I didn't. The real problem was that David had created a system where merit was secondary to relationships, where hard work was taken for granted, and where the people who actually made the company successful were treated as interchangeable resources. Even if I'd gotten the promotion, that system would have continued to exist. Other talented people would have been overlooked. Other Marcus Rodriguez types would have been elevated beyond their competence. The cycle would have continued. Sometimes, the only way to fix a broken system is to let it break completely. Today, I'm the chief marketing officer at a growing tech company in Portland. I have a team of 12 people, and I make it a point to know each of their career goals. I ask them what they want to do, not just what they can do for me. And when promotion time comes around, I look at results first, relationships second. Because I learned something important that night at Cascadia Restaurant. Power isn't about who you know or where you went to school or how well you fit into the existing hierarchy. Real power comes from being indispensable, from being the person who others can't succeed without. But the most important lesson I learned is this: you can't change a system by working within it if the system is designed to keep you in place. Sometimes, you have to be willing to walk away from everything you've built to build something better. The people who underestimate you today are the same people who will claim they always believed in you tomorrow. Don't wait for their recognition. Create your own opportunities. Build your own power base. And when they finally realize what they've lost, make sure you're too busy succeeding to care. 3 years later, Meridian Corp is still struggling to rebuild their client base. David is working as a consultant, helping other companies avoid the mistakes he made. Marcus left the tech industry entirely and now sells real estate in Phoenix. And me? I'm living proof that sometimes the best revenge is simply being too successful to care about revenge at all. The corporate world is full of people who think they know what leadership looks like. They promote the people who remind them of themselves, who went to the right schools, who say the right things at the right time. But real leadership isn't about looking the part. It's about getting results, building trust, and creating value for everyone around you. If you're sitting in a cubicle right now, feeling undervalued and overlooked, remember this story. Your worth isn't determined by whether your boss recognizes it. Your career isn't limited by other people's inability to see your potential. And your success doesn't depend on fitting into someone else's definition of what success looks like. Sometimes, the greatest act of leadership is walking away from people who can't see your worth and finding people who can. What do you think? Have you ever been in a situation where you felt overlooked or undervalued? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about workplace drama and the power of standing up for yourself.